Hello, everyone. Dan Casper here in the mountains of Colorado, as you can tell. Actually, this is one of my favorite places to go to. This is out in Western Colorado. Hopefully, you enjoy the background. I'm going over some of the lesson two stuff. I graded all your lesson two um, analytical questions. I just wanted to give you a little bit of feedback on some key points that I noticed, just to make sure we're clear on everything. So externalities obviously was a really big theme this week, and it's a major theme in sustainability. So I want to make sure you're clear on this. And it can be a little bit confusing, and I apologize for that, but it's just one of those things that there are some conflicting um, assessments of what an externality is and isn't. So externality technically is something that happens to somebody that's not involved in an economic transaction. Okay, I think we all have a good sense of that. That's external, it's an external cost or benefit, right? So it's an externality. Where it gets a little bit tricky is that for our purposes in this class, where most people define an externality, a positive externality is something that has a positive benefit to somebody else, but it's not included in the price. Okay. A negative externality has a negative impact and it's not included in the price. So in this class, if I ask you to identify a positive or a negative externality, you have to make sure that it's not included in the cost of that product. Let me give you a quick example. So a couple of you mentioned as an example, cell phones. Okay. And so a cell phone has many possible externalities. If you look, some of you said with like a positive externality is that one or two of you said, I get all this extra benefits from my phone. I can do things on my phone, and that's a benefit. But remember, you're paying for the phone, so any benefits you get from it, they're by definition not external. Okay, so they're not externalities. Um, if you said that after I'm done, I sell my phone back to the the phone provider, and then they resell it to someone else, and that other person benefits from what was my phone, and so that's an externality. But again, all of that is priced in. So when you trade in your phone, you get a benefit from that. You should have gotten some kind of store credit or a free phone or whatever, free upgrade. Then the provider, whatever, whoever's the phone makes the phone, whoever, the AT&Ts of the world and the T-Mobiles and so forth, when they get your phone back, they'll do what they refurbish it, etc. And then they will resell to someone. So again, that's an economic transaction that's agreed upon by two parties. So that benefit of that phone to the other person is not actually an externality because it's all included in the cost of that whole, all of those transactions. Okay. So if the cost is included, it's technically not a positive or a negative externality. Okay. So in really rare cases, there's externalities that are really bad to a third party and they're included in the price. Every once in a while that happens. It's very rare. But if that's the case, it's not a negative externality anymore because it's included in the cost. Okay, so remember, anytime you get a benefit, or in the case of the cell phone company, they get your money, so that's not external either. But if you said something like the cell phone was manufactured in a plant with poor working conditions and people got sick and they had high hospital bills, that's almost certainly an externality because the manufacturer's not paying for those hospital bills most likely. Or it polluted the local environment, got some people sick. That's certainly not being paid for by the cell phone company. Or on the other end, the downstream side, if that phone ends up in an e-waste facility somewhere, someone gets sick from it, and don't get compensated for that, then technically that's not an externality. Okay, so externalities can be a little bit confusing, but just remember, if it's included in the cost, it's not a positive or negative. Okay. The tragedy of the commons, I enjoyed reading your answers on that. Just remember, the tragedy of the commons only occurs for open access resources. So it's a precondition of having a commons by definition, in this definition actually, is open access. So nobody controls it, nobody owns it. People can pull from it whatever they want. That's a commons in this context. And so when nobody owns it, nobody is in it, but everybody has access to it, there's this sort of perverse incentive to overuse it, because like you can, you use it up quickly, so nobody, so the other people don't use it up quickly. And the really big thing is, remember, the way this really works is that if I share something in common with everybody and nobody owns it, and if I use that resource to benefit myself and myself only, so I get the entire benefit from that, right? So the benefit goes all to me, like I'm, raising my cattle or whatever. But since I'm sharing the resource with everybody, okay, so there's a cost associated, right? Like to raise your cattle, you have to eat, you have to have some land that with some grass and so forth. But if everybody owns that grass, I get all the benefit of that resource, but I split all of the drawbacks, right? So like that grass is everybody's, so everybody loses out because the grass is getting eaten, but I get all the benefit. So the problem with that is that a quote unquote rational person, a rational economic actor, as we'll learn a little bit later, this homo economicus, as they're referred to, the rational economic actor is like, I get all the benefit, but I split the cost with everyone. This is great. I'm going to do as much as I can, right? Like that's, if you're just maximizing your own personal gain, that's the problem with commons type resources. Okay, nobody owns it, so you benefit so much more than you lose by adding more and more and using it more and more. That's the problem, the inherent problem with the commons. Okay, and so that's the tragedy being it's set up to fail. That's what it means by tragedy, excuse me. Okay, so there are a lot of ways, and we went over all the ways. You guys really did a good job. You have your market-based mechanisms. You have sort of confusingly the commons property regimes, which is really just cooperatively owned. So someone has to own it. So it is either be private in private hands, there has to be a cost associated with it, or a tax to use it, or a tax if you overuse it. And so the really big commons problem we're facing today, the two main ones, number one, the atmosphere, right? So we have this atmospheric commons where we can just dump pollution into most of the time without penalty, right? Like I drove around, whatever, I drove to work today. I emitted a bunch of carbon dioxide and particulates and other pollution and just dumped it into the atmospheric commons. Again, I get all the benefit from driving my car, or most of it anyway, but I split that pollution cost with everybody. So that's a really big problem. The second big one is oceans, or oceans, or any sort of public marine or freshwater environments that people can pull from without rules, right? Because again, if I'm a big I have a big fishing boat on the open ocean, and I'm sharing the ocean with everybody on the planet. Nobody owns it, but I get all the benefit from overfishing it. So that's a commons problem as well. So these are problems that do pop up. It's not just like cattle grazing. I'm not trying to solve the cattle grazing problems of the world, right? So these are bigger issues at hand. And as you can see, and as you'll see in future lessons with this, the impossibility of sustainable growth and all that, I'm very openly critical of the way economic markets function. And I just want to be really clear about my perception of it, having, been in this space for quite a while now. And that is that markets work really, really, really well at managing scarce resources. Really good. I mean, there's really no better way to do it. But there's a couple of problems with it, and one of them you saw this week. One of the really big problems is it doesn't work well if all the costs are not included, right? So if you can account for all the costs, and everything is accounted for, all the impacts on everybody now and in the future, great. That is, in my opinion, the best way to manage resources. However, as you've seen, there are externalities all over the place that aren't included in the cost of a market price, which is market failure. Okay. And so that's really one of the main problems. One of the other problems, and a lot of you did sort of figure this out, is that, if we run out of things, like Julian Simon was saying, like the more we use, the more we have. It's really important to keep in mind that he wasn't saying that we're going to actually have more. So like if we burn more oil, we'll end up with more oil. What he's saying is, he's an economist, right? What he's saying is we'll end up with whatever oil does for us will be cheaper because remember that whole process, right? Like you use more of it, it becomes scarce, people see an opportunity to make money, and then all of a sudden this sort of collective mind of human society finds a way to get more of that, but not necessarily more of it. Sometimes they'll come up with a new technology like fracking, where we can actually get more than we thought we could get, but a lot of times we just substitute for it, right? So now EVs are the big thing where hopefully we'll be substituting for oil. Okay, so Simon cares not about the resources at all. He's like, look, we can replace copper, we can replace anything. I think his argument runs into some roadblocks when you come to things like biodiversity, which once something is extinct, it's gone. And the complexity of nature is just something we cannot duplicate. If all the trees go extinct, for example, humans can't. There's things that can replace functions that the trees have, but we can't replace a tree right now. Even carbon dioxide, we can't even absorb CO2 like a tree does. We've been trying for a really long time. Okay, so markets are really, really good at managing scarce resources, but all of the prices have to be included. All the costs have to be included in the price. Otherwise, you end up with market failure, which is a bad thing. Like climate change is one big market failure. Sorry, I had to look at my notes there for a second. So my synopsis, and I put this in the presentation, but I want to reiterate it, is that markets are really good at managing things that provide quick feedback when shortages or surpluses occur, that when the impacts are clear and causes are easy to determine, right? So if we have pollution coming from a whole bunch of different, millions of cars a day, and all that pollution is causing these impacts, it's really hard to pinpoint whose pollution is doing what. So that's one of the really, really big problems with pollution is there's no signature on carbon dioxide. There's no signature on nitrogen dioxide. We don't know where it comes from. Okay, so if we don't know where it comes from, we don't know how to price it in. We don't know who to charge for that, for the problems that are associated with that. And it's also really good for things that can be replenished or replaced, right? Like if we run out of copper, it'll, it's not, there's no inherent value to copper. Copper is only good for what it does for us. Now, I don't know nutrition, but maybe it is irreplaceable. But anyway, most things are just, they just are. But whereas something like nature, trees, fresh water, that's something that can't be replaced. Okay, so they're good at managing those things. They're really bad at managing things with non-market value, as we talked about. Again, problems whose cause is difficult to identify, like pollution. Things that may happen in the future, climate change, huge one. How do we account for the cost of climate change that happened down the road? That's, them's fighting words, right? Like that's what we've been fighting about for a while. So having future costs, like how do we price that in? You're always going to argue because there's no objective way to determine that. As I said, things that can't be replaced is the other thing. So like biodiversity is a good example of that. Okay. And we'll keep looking at some of the like pluses and negatives of the market in general. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there for now. I'll try to do follow-up on lessons. I'll try to prime you for some of the other lessons as well. But I do like to give you this feedback. And again, I'll leave it as I usually do with a reminder that I do have student hours if you want to ask any questions about any of this and discuss these in person. Okay, hope you're enjoying the content. Talk to you soon.